Hey, welcome to GothCast. This is Dr. Sanders, and it's a special episode introduction. What could that be for? Well, every time there's something very unique about an episode, I'll do one of these, and this one is very unique in that this is the GothCast podcast reunion special. That's right. Robbie Gore came back on to do this episode. He hasn't been featured on an episode of the podcast since November 15th, 2016, which is the last time we talked about Christian death. So that's crazy. It's been almost 5 years since he was last on the podcast, and really anything with GothCast, which is so funny because behind the scenes, we actually talk all the time. We're super good friends. Actually, I think we're actually better friends than we were when we were making content together, so which is really cool. I mean, that's great. And we were talking one day, and I think I was mentioning, man, like, how could anybody do an episode of Christian Death picking up where we left off? Because you'd have to do like 12 episodes or 12 albums, you'd have to be familiar with it to catch up to where we were. I was like, well, hey, why don't we just do one together? And it's like, okay. And that's about as easy as it was to get this going. If you actually want to keep up with the other stuff that Robbie has been doing, he actually plays guitar in a band called Delving, Delving, and they released an EP recently called Reverie, Reverie, which is actually really good. It's not stereotypical goth music, but you should still take a listen to see if it's something that you like. And of course, if you want to hear his bass playing, he actually played bass on the most recent Dr. Sanders album, Patch Overlap. But definitely check out Delving if you get a chance. You can find their music at delvingmusic.bandcamp.com. And that's Delvingmusic.bandcamp.com. That was a mouthful. So this was a lot of fun. It's always great catching up, and a little bit surreal to be doing this kind of episode with him after so long. And really the first one that we had done together since I had a whole bunch of health issues previously, years ago. And it was really the first one I had done with him where I had been so clear-headed and much happier in my life than I was when we did a lot of the initial episodes. So even better of an episode for me. You may also notice that the audio quality was maybe a little, I don't want to say poorer, but maybe a little softer than it usually is. We did this one long distance over like an internet call, and we recorded separately, and there was a little bit of issues with kind of the call qualities and stuff. It was kind of snowing. We had a little bit of crazy weather here in Washington when it was recorded. I tried to smooth it out the best I could with editing, so it's listenable for you guys, and I hope it's okay for you, but the audio quality isn't quite as crisp and super perfect as I usually like it. Anyway, I'll stop talking so we can get on to some very strange albums by the Valor Kand era of Christian death. This was a lot of fun. I hope we can be doing it sometime in the future again, picking some other artist and, kind of joining up to complain about ridiculous things like we always do. Anyway, here it is. GothCast, Christian Death, Part 5, Valor Kand, Part 2. Something like that. All right, welcome to GothCast. I'm Dr. Sanders.
And this is Robbie Gore.
Wait. What? What was that? I don't think I heard that correctly. Did you say Robbie Gore?
I did indeed. That's right, folks. The famous, the fabled, the one and only Robbie Gore has returned.
Well, a lot of people probably are wondering what the heck's up with that. Because I do believe that several years ago, we're like, well, I think I'm going to step down from GothCast, and then you haven't appeared on anything for almost half a decade. And
yeah, it's weird to think about.
People don't really know that we do talk quite a bit, and we have in the ensuing years. We keep up all the time. Yeah. But we have not recorded episodes together, and you're doing something else with your life as well. And but the opportunity, we just kind of got talking about it, and we're like, hey, why don't we just do another episode together? Kind of a reunion.
Have a little reunion of sorts.
Yeah. So what you can think of, this is the GothCast reunion special. This is the OG lineup. This is all the original cast members.
This is the Misfits tour that you would have paid $200 for.
Exactly. But this time you don't have to put your cell phone in a bag. So That's cool. But yeah, we decided this would be fun, and what better an episode for you to come back for than Christian Death. This is going to be kind of part 5, actually.
Oh, yeah, it is technically.
Because we did Christian Death. This is the Roz albums.
Yep.
Then we did Christian Death Part 2 with the Valor albums.
Yep.
Then we did Christian Death with Roz Williams, which is like Roz's solo version of Christian Death that was in the 90s. And then separately, me and Brian did Shadow Project.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny because this overlaps with some of the Roz albums, and some of Shadow Project's albums like The Years. But this is technically part 5 of Christian Death, but it's really Christian Death, Valor Kand, part 2.
Yep. We should word it exactly that way on the title.
Yep, exactly. Christian Death, part 5, in parentheses, Valor Kand, part 2.
Mm-hmm.
Or just Christian Death, but like just have, never mind. Okay. But
it would be it would make as much sense as their discography does on Spotify.
Seriously. Oh my gosh, that's a whole different discussion. But we're going to be continuing with the Valor Kand stuff. And that's actually one of the things that kind of got us talking about, hey, maybe come back for an episode, because the joke that we had was, how the heck is anybody going to listen to all those albums to continue the episode? Because it's like 12 albums or something that we already had talked about, and to even have the context of where these albums are. And so that's kind of what prompted it. But let's kind of get, I guess, a little bit of the history. If you haven't listened to the other episodes, I really recommend listening to at least the Valor Kand Part 1 episode.
Yeah, I think that's a minimum requirement for kind of this episode at least.
Yeah, I would say that it just gives you way more context. I'll give you a brief thing. Basically, Christian Death was with Roz Williams initially. Then he left the band after, that's to be debated. But eventually Valor Kand took over the band and started releasing albums. And throughout the 80s, he had a pretty stable lineup. And then as we see this decade and like these albums going on, he kind of shifts into phase 2 or 3 of what would be considered Christian Death.
Mm-hmm.
Going in the 90s, we see albums literally coming out the same year that Roz came out with competing Christian Death albums.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, he ends up becoming the singer of Christian Death because he's the guitar player at the time in the band.
Oh, Valor Kand?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when in Ashes, or Catastrophe Ballet and Ashes, like basically what you can think of as the band that was backing Roz's singing was technically like, it's basically his Pompeii 99.
Yeah.
Which was the band before Christian, basically Valor and Jatan and all that stuff before Christian Death.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what led to when Roz wasn't in the band anymore, and Valor's just like, well, it's technically like already, basically the band.
A different band, yeah.
Anyway, like I've already kind of like been in this version of the band. And then they did, I believe, a version of it called Sin and Sacrifice. And it was like, it would say Tiny, Sin and Sacrifice, and it would say of Christian Death, like really big. And there's been debate. And even since we did the episodes, there's been even more debate and stuff where I believe Jatan, and by the way, I think in all those, I don't remember if it's every episode, but I'm pretty sure most of the episodes, we said Gitani, but it's Jatan Damone.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we used to say Gitani.
Yeah. But as I said to somebody who knows her, because I said, well, there wasn't as many interviews available at the time that we had heard. And so we never heard it spoken at the time. At least I don't think we did. But
yeah, I'm trying to remember, because didn't she perform at the
Only Theater of Pain?
Yeah, the Only Theater of Pain with Rick Agnew. And
yeah, so I don't remember when we saw that, but I'm pretty sure we probably would have heard it at that point.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had recorded all the episodes prior to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it's Jatan, so Jatan Damone. I'm okay with owning up to that because it's incorrect.
Yeah.
But it's we're gonna actually see some of her on these releases. It's kind of weird. I'll talk about this album and stuff, but we're on to the next batch of albums for the Valor Kand era, which I said has a lot more albums than the Roz era of Christian Death has. And I'll try and mention compilations and stuff too, but it's so messy. I'm just trying to keep it as easy, just like the other episodes. Yeah. I'm trying to keep it as easy as I can for everybody to understand. So in the last episode, we talked about All the Love, All the Hate, the 2 albums, but technically it kind of got released as a double album later, and neither one of us really liked that release. And
yeah,
there was some stuff that was on sex and drugs and Jesus Christ where we thought it was okay, but you could tell that by, compared to atrocities and scriptures, that it felt like a big decline in quality to us.
Yeah, definitely. Well, because I don't entirely remember if there was really even information available on this at the time. But to me, yeah, the drop in quality sounds like, I don't know, they might have potentially lost funding, any number of things, because I think they still would have had some studio money by the time they did Atrocities and potentially Still for Scriptures. And I feel like you can hear it on those albums.
Yeah, well, I did listen to and read a few more articles because I tend to do more research than I used to do back then. And Valor pretty publicly came out about a lot of the albums in the interim time, but when they were kind of moving away from, I wouldn't say some of the popularity, but more of the transition years of Christian death, the money kind of would run out, or it just felt like, oh, I couldn't record what I wanted, or I got to do a third of what I wanted. So I'm sure that is probably, some of the stuff he's talking about, because there's even a part where he said like, oh, people tell me what their favorite album is. I say, oh, I'm so sorry. That you have to listen to it that way. We noted that initially, where like, what the heck happened, even with like the percussion and stuff. And we're going to see some varying quality in this episode as well. I don't feel like it's as dramatic of a shift, but that's probably because we've already heard like we've heard Atrocities, like that album's, and Scriptures too, like that's greatly produced album. So anyway, in this time, since All the Love, All the Hate, in 1990, we did see Roz starting to do his own version of Christian Death. And I don't know how it was billed at the time. I do have I think it's called the Death Mix or Death. I think that's what it is. Yeah. It's a compilation album, and it comes with a DVD, and it's Roz performing in 1990, and that's billed as like Christian Death Live. Yeah. But there was starting to be some of the disputes in legality between Roz and Valor about some of this stuff. And like I said, there's not like too much concrete. A lot of it is hearsay as far as I can tell. If it is a definitive guide to the law, like what happened, then I don't know what it is, because even between people who are involved with it, there's some conflicting stuff. Oh, definitely. I mean, even stories that are more well documented, I feel like there's big lapses and things. I mean, even between like the Sisters of Mercy splitting off and forming the Mission, and them trying to use a similar name, like there's not a super clear story on the legality surrounding that. And since we did the original video, I believe that, like I said, I did preface this with, I don't have all the facts, but I believe that there was a thing where Jatonic said something, or some quote by her, that they were going to do the Sin and Sacrifice thing, but eventually it was decided to keep doing Christian Death. But I think part of the band saw that there was an opportunity to do it as Sin and Sacrifice, and or whatever name they were going to go to, because they were already still drawing big crowds. Yeah. Seeing like, oh, we can just change the name, like we'll be fine. But the thing that matters in the end is that it's still Christian Death. Yeah, that's the name. That's still what all the albums are released under. That's still, and for better or worse, people, I know that it's funny, as time's gone on, I feel like the argument even more so is... the Team Roz versus Team Valor? Yeah, well, just all of that. Like, it's just been so much more heavily debated, even since we made those episodes. Yeah. And it's, whether you want to agree with it or not, still today, right now, if you go onto the Spotify or discography or whatever, you will still see Only Theater of Pain, Through Ashes, and you will see it in the same discography as Prophecies. Yeah. So that's really just... And you'll also see it in the same discography as the Christian Death with Roz Williams stuff, too. Like, wait, the Rage of Angels and stuff is included in their discography? It shows up as Christian Death. Wow. So even the ones like Roz broke off and did the other ones, like Iron Mask and stuff, are still included in there? Yep. Wow, that's even crazier to me. Yep. But cool. So, I mean, for better or worse, people just... It's all included today. Christian Death is Christian Death. Yeah. Apparently that's what the consensus of the discography is at this moment. So... let's get into some stuff here. So Roz started touring, and in 1990, this album comes out. It's called, and I believe it's Latin, So, and all the titles are in Latin as well. So I'm going to try and pronounce this. This came out from the Valor side of albums. This is all the ones we're talking about today, the Valor Kand Christian Death albums. And this album is called Insanus, Ultio, Proditio, Misericordiaque.
That's probably as good a job as I could have done.
So this album was essentially, I believe, a kind of a collection of unreleased or unfinished songs that were finished for this release, and then some new material was added in. It has been, the hypothesis has been thrown out there that this was released only because they had seen that the Ross band had been touring, and in an attempt to kind of like be like, hey, just to remind everybody, like, we're Christian Death.
Yeah.
I don't know how much, stuff there is to that, but I've seen that description of this album.
Yeah.
But even, right now, just like sometimes when we do albums and then later there a lot of more information becomes available, I don't know as much information about these albums that is out there. So I've been able to find as much as we normally could with, say, Only Theater Pain, which is heavily documented. So
yeah, I mean, it really drops off after like Sex and Drugs and Jesus Christ. I feel like the information on Christian Death really starts to become hard to find.
And if it's in the book Phantoms, I haven't read it all yet, so that's another thing too.
Yep.
But anyway, this album, as far as the lineup, like I said, Jatan Damone had left at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We do have her still on some of these tracks, doing some vocals. We have David Glass still on drums. Awesome. We have somebody named Kota, which I believe is a guy.
Yeah.
On bass, and he also did bass for The Heretics Alive, which is a live album. Very poorly mixed. Oh my gosh. Like, great performances. Oh my gosh. It hurts.
Yeah.
But you can see the VHS too for Heretics Alive. I believe that's Kota playing on there. But we do have some very strange stuff. We have Roz on this album. Wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a song called Vexatio. And on the original release of the album, it actually has Roz singing the vocals. It sounds very poorly recorded, very distorted. And the song is actually pretty good. It sounds like an early era Christian Death song to me. It's actually pretty good.
No, it does. I suppose this will lead us to the next part, which is that there's another version of the song that has Valor singing on it, which you can find on the Spotify official album for Spotify, anyways.
Yeah, what was like the newer streaming versions of it and it's called, I believe, I think it's called Infinus Vexatio.
Mine's still showing it just as Vexatio.
Oh, really? Oh man, I've seen it on, I think, like YouTube Music or something like that has it.
Yeah.
As Infinus. Well, that's even more confusing. But
yeah,
point is, there's a version of Vexatio that has Roz singing. Like I said, very distorted vocals. I don't know what the source pulled from was, but it's interesting. But
I wonder what would have been the decision to release it with his vocals, considering they're trying to like distance themselves from him.
I don't know. And it seemed, especially later, that for Kand, it became very frustrating to still be linked with Roz at the time. And he's okay. And I think I said this somewhat before.
Yeah.
Valor Kand is an artist, and we've said this about a lot of people. Artists, they can have one opinion, and you have to be a little bit.
They can be temperamental.
I've heard things where he's very frustrated with the association. Other times where he's just totally cool, like, that was a different time, a different person who was in the band, and now he's not, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what this decision was. I don't know if it's a record company or what, but it does appear on earlier versions of this album. This was released in Italy initially, and I believe it wasn't released in the US until 1993.
Gotcha.
So as far as I can tell.
Yeah. I couldn't find nearly any information and was just trying to pull like discography information, and that just has it listed as like 1990, but yeah.
But I don't know how it came over to the shores initially or whatever, but apparently this material was recorded somewhere from 1985 to 1990.
Makes sense.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the album overall, I was kind of surprised by this one.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this one. Like, there's some good tracks on here. There's some things that I don't care. I'm not particularly adverse to when bands like do the atmospheric between tracks, but there's some on here that I think are good and other ones that I'm not as into.
Okay. That actually gets us into something that I'm just going to get out of the way right now.
Yeah.
I'm not really a big fan of a lot of the ambient stuff on these albums, but there is a lot of the ambient stuff on these albums where it's like, a opening track. Almost all of these have like an opening track that has chains dragging or thunderstorms or somebody chanting, something like that. I'm just going to say that they exist because they all sound very similar to me.
Yeah.
They're all very ambient. Most of them are atonal, and not my thing. So, yes, this starts with one of those.
Yeah. I could do without it, but it's not the biggest deal in the world.
I would say that it adds to the mood of the album. Yes.
It definitely does. I think it was a smart idea for them to do some atmospheric stuff. Because I'm always a fan of when bands like are willing to put in some of the more concept-y stuff into their albums. You know, like we're going to set an atmosphere, we're going to have an intent behind the album. And so I do really appreciate them for, putting that kind of thought behind the record. It's interesting. It feels like, particularly in comparison to the previous Christian death material, this feels more theatrical to me in some ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah.
Like the vocal deliveries feel more theatrical. It feels like they're using a lot of, sound layering of like different instruments, even within like the regular tracks. It almost like feels like it was meant to be like performed as a visual show in like a certain sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I could totally hear that. And by this point, especially after the previous two albums before this, you definitely heard Valor kind of developing his own vocal style.
Yeah.
Whereas on Atrocities and Scriptures, you still had that kind of like he's mimicking Roz's style a little bit to fit with the band. Here, I would say you still have kind of the classic Christian death sound of what you think of throughout the 80s, but it is developing into more of the playing with the vocal ideas, or especially, I mean, whether you like it or not is a different discussion, but like going to the like just singing really low for certain parts.
Yeah.
And then just going into the regular, like, Valor Kand sort of singing style. But there's a lot of playing with the vocals in these.
Definitely.
Especially this one.
Yeah.
But we're going to see some other versions of that, too, as we go on. But, yeah, this is where I'm starting to see, and we saw it on the last one, but, like, you really started to see it a lot here, where the playing with the vocals and, yeah, I guess that's a really good word, the theatricality and theatrical performances like aspect of it, where I could totally see him.
Oh, I want to make a correction. The Spotify has both Vexatio and Insanus Vexatio on the same album.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, that's different.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, in fact, let's talk about that song, right? So,
yeah,
like, do I think the actual song is good? Yes, I think the song is actually really good. It's got this really cool keyboard bell sound, like almost like chimes.
Yeah. Which
I really like. The biggest problem I have with it is it kind of has some of the problems I have with some other Christian death things. I felt like it's not necessarily the performance is bad on the drums, but the drums themselves, like the rhythm track is really just poor.
Yeah.
Like not the performance itself, but the actual like mixing of it.
That's actually going to probably be a recurring theme for me across these albums in particular. Is not necessarily the recording quality itself will vary from album to album, but
yes,
particularly the mixing though I feel like changes a lot between these four albums, like, and from track to track within albums. Like there's like, I feel like Malice Amor is mixed in a way that makes sense for what it is, compared to Vexatio, where I feel like things like levels feel like they're placed all over the place. Like the vocals, like, I mean, vocals are usually louder than everything else, but they're placed like way above everything else.
Yeah, I actually said that too, especially on Somnium.
Yeah,
which is like one of my favorite songs in the album. Yeah. Like, so I'm picking something that I really like on this release.
Yeah,
the vocals are just like overbearing, and I'm just like, man, if they could just bring it down a little bit, like this could be I mean, it's already a good track, but like it could be that puts that next level. It is just that all over this where vocal levels just feel way too loud, or especially with drums, like maybe there's a little too much reverb or something. It just doesn't have that punch.
Yeah.
And you could like hear it in the songs, like you hear how it should be.
Yeah.
At least I do. And yeah, that's definitely something that was really noticeable for me. But Malice Amor as a song, it's actually really awesome.
Yeah, I really
love
like
that bass riff.
Yeah, the bass riff's cool. I like that. So for one, I like that they kind of carry over with some of the ambient opening from Savanus Rex. Savanus Rex?
Yeah.
However you say it.
Savanus Rex. Yeah. I think that's right.
But I like that bleeds in a little bit because I hated when people would do like intro songs and there was like a hard cut to the next song.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I like that this one bleeds over a little bit into the next track. And then what I feel like is like a strength of Malice Amor is I feel like starts to play into some of like the campiness of their material, or like I feel like a lot of the Roz era stuff, they're both different approaches that I feel like are really valid, but I feel like the Roz stuff in particular is very, I mean, this is not to say that maybe either was intended to be this way, but the Roz stuff comes across to me as like very deliberately serious. And while I know that, Valor intends this to be a very serious album, I feel like there's some embracing of like some of the more campy elements of the music, which I actually think work really well for like this style of vocal that he's developing and like the new sound of the band that's emerging.
Well, it's very interesting that this is probably the most subtle out of the albums that we're listening to today.
Yeah.
Like, I guess some people would even see that like some of these vocals are just the lyrics is being over the top.
Yeah.
Like it goes 1,000 times higher, as we're going to see. But I think that, yeah,
pornographic messiahs over the top?
Sexy Death God. I get what you're saying though, but
yeah.
I did feel like this is, I wouldn't say a more fun album than some of those, but yeah, the earlier stuff felt like so, like especially the Roz stuff felt so deliberately like poetic in a way, or trying to be poetic, like a statement
and
about
earnest and
yeah.
Not that this isn't earnest by any means, but just I guess angsty is maybe a good word in a certain sense. Yeah.
I mean, hey, I would say that.
Yeah.
But some of the other stuff we got here that's also, we have some other the ambient stuff. Tragicus Conatus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. It's another ambient track.
That one I like more.
But you know what it sounded like to me?
What?
It sounded like one of the songs from the Alice games, those American McGee Alice games.
See, I never played those. My niece is really into them. I've never played any of them.
Man, you should definitely watch. I think this guy did this review that was really good and took like forever to make.
Yeah.
I can't think of who it is. Oh, it's GothCast Video.
I have never heard of him. What does he do?
He provides a wealth of great content that can be brought forth to any device that you own, and it just provides great quality family fun content that, while at times may be controversial, whatever. I reviewed that game, but it made me think of that because I had to listen to freaking soundtrack like endlessly to play that game.
For all your darkly inclined needs, GothCast is available.
That's right. Exactly. Subscribe. Like the subscribe button. Anyway, speaking of some other great songs on here, Venomum.
Yeah, that one is probably my favorite from the record.
Yeah, you got Jatan.
Yeah, got Jatan, and it feels like I don't want to make this all about Roz, but like it reminds me of like it feels like a nice marriage of like the earlier stuff and like the direction that they're going in.
Yeah, it really reminded me of especially something off of Scriptures.
Yeah,
like I could see it. I could literally see this track being on that record, mm-hmm. and it just fitting right in. But it's also one of the better mixed songs. It really reminds me of the song "Sick of Love," or I think it goes by a whole bunch of different names, but probably the most famous title for it is "Sick of Love."
Yeah.
But it really reminds me of that. Just even lyrical content, performance, like instrumentation, just everything. So absolutely awesome. You do have some of the other kind of okay stuff on here. You have Vita Voluntaria.
Yeah.
It's like a short ballad. It's almost like you start to get really into like the super religious kind of sounding stuff with the record.
It feels almost like a Gregorian chant in some ways. Like,
yes, absolutely. Yes. And we're going to see more of that as time goes on, but
yeah,
I thought I'd mention it here. And that's really my biggest complaint about this album, other than obviously, like you said, some of the mixing and stuff, is that I felt like some of the soundscape stuff, while it probably makes sense from the perspective of like, this is the concept of this album.
Yeah.
To me, because you do have really strong songs like Malice Amor, Insomnium, and Vexatio, it doesn't really help your case to fill it with these other ambient tracks that aren't nearly as strong.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think that in some ways, I think my biggest criticism of this album is that I think that it could be kind of cut down to like an EP with a couple of ambient tracks thrown into it. And I feel like that would be like a more solid release.
I absolutely agree with that. And yeah, that's really exactly. You just have a super strong one. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know the behind the scenes of this.
Yeah.
Because it would be 4 more years until we got like a full new Valor Kand album.
Yeah.
There were several other releases, like I think live releases and compilations and stuff that were released in between the time.
Yeah.
Between this and Sexy Death God. And we're going to see a little bit of lineup changes and get some more of the constant members that we still have in the band today. So this is just a weird transition album to me in a lot of ways. Has some great stuff. And like I said, I don't know when all of it dates back from. I don't have like a list of this one was recorded here and this one was recorded here this year.
Yeah.
But you can almost tell that it is kind of a compiled album that
yeah, it definitely feels like material that's been sourced from different points in time. Like,
yeah, exactly. And not just the quality of the performances, but like just the rhythm stuff. And you could just tell, like whenever it's not recorded all at once or with the idea of it being together.
Yeah.
But overall, for what it is, I think it's actually pretty good. I just recommend checking out those specific songs.
Yeah.
Just being aware that, it could have been mixed a little better. So yeah.
Overall, I don't think a terrible album by any means. Mixing's a little weird, but there's some good songwriting on here, and I think that some of the ambient tracks are actually really cool. Others are not my jam, but yeah, I would say check it out for sure.
Yeah. Also, that name, what?
Insanus Ultio Proditio Misericordiaque.
Okay, I get it, because I name songs really weird things too.
Yeah.
Like, I have a song called Feldspar that has nothing, like, does not have the word Feldspar in it.
At least it's just one word, though.
Yes, but I think also having all of the album, like, with Latin names, it doesn't, like, it just suits them. Oh, by the way, we usually play Art Critic with the covers. Got an okay cover for an album. Like, it's got, it's actually, of the ones that we're looking at, the best cover, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it's got, like, this cool, like, ominous female figure who, there are obviously some religious themes here, whether, I don't know, she's supposed to be someone godly or satanic, but there's clearly something supernatural going on. I really dig
something going on with that. I agree. The album art is really cool.
Yeah.
So that is Insanus Ultio Proditio Misericordiaque. Oh, God, it's okay. Well, Robert.
Yeah.
I've had enough of this. I am over Latin. I failed Latin class. I know you know that. We took Latin class together, apparently, at this moment. I wish we had an album that was sexier. Maybe more religious.
The thing about sex and religion is that when you combine Christianity and death, you can get a sexy death god.
Oh my. That's the next album.
That's it?
My gosh. Okay. God. Well, yeah, so the next album we're talking about is Sexy Death God from 1994. I do want to mention this, that in the time between Insanus Ultio Proditio Misericordia, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Okay. In the time between that and this album, 3 Christian Death with or featuring Roz Williams albums came out. So this was Roz's version of the band. we had the Iron Mask came out in 1992. We had the Path of Sorrows that came out in 1993, and we had the Rage of Angels that came out in 1994. And like I said, we did an episode just dedicated to those releases. It's, I mean, you know, they like just like this, it had varying quality, and we did recommend a few of those.
Yeah, it's actually a nice. For those of you who haven't heard the episodes, you should listen to them. If you don't, they're actually some good albums to check out if you've already heard the early Christian Death stuff. I mean, I don't know, maybe you're like Team Raws or something, and you kind of want a taste of what could have been. That's a nice window into it.
Also, I think the one that we recommended the most was The Rage of Angels. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure that was the one where we're just like, man, we got through 3 albums and we're just like, oh man, this is the one. But this album actually came out, and we mentioned this album back then because this album came out the same year as The Rage of Angels, so 1994.
It's almost like there's a pattern here.
Yeah, right. But so that's what we mentioned so many years ago, is that you had 2 versions of Christian Death coming out with albums, and sometimes in the same year.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, there was all kinds of compilations and tiny little live album stuff that came out in between that so it's even more confusion.
Oh yeah.
But like, you know, if you didn't know, like, oh, this is a live version of this or whatever, you know. But point is, Sexy Death God, 1994, God, would that be the 6th Christian Death Valor Kand era album, technically? Depends on if you want to count Insanus as a compilation, but
yeah,
we have some lineup changes again, and this is going to be where we see a new member that's going to be in the band pretty much forever, at least until right now. We have Maitri, 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 vocals and bass from Holland. She brings a very different dynamic than a lot of other members and becomes much more involved in the band, of course, especially going on. There's a quote. I just wanted to, in 2010, there was she was asked a question saying, what's one of the most irritating questions you get, or what's a question you get asked all the time online, or what people have said that isn't true. And so she said, me and Valor are not an item, and we are not married. She says, I see that all the time on the internet, and she wanted to make that clear. So, just in case you're wondering, not an item, not married to Valor. So, yes, but a great performer. And then for this album in particular, we have somebody named Steamer on drums.
That sounds appropriate. Yeah. I didn't mean that in a detrimental way for anyone.
Oh, I see. But, I mean, for like the Valor Kand era to have like a crazy name like that or something.
Yeah, well, and then I also feel like, I mean, we'll talk about it more as we get in the next album, but there's some tracks in here that kind of pick up some of the like heavier, more like industrial qualities of music that's going on at the time.
Well, as far as I can tell, this is the only album that has this particular lineup.
Yeah.
And it's as far as I can tell, it's a 3-piece at this time. I don't know if there were other additional musicians, but as far as I can tell, it's Valor on guitar and vocals and like the strings, the violin, cello stuff. Maitri on the vocals and bass, and then Steamer on drums.
Yeah.
And then we see, as we're going to have a different lineup next album. But this album, you know, the name is Sexy Death God, right? And if you're going to have an album called Sexy Death God, this is probably what you think of when you hear an album called Sexy Death God.
Yeah. I don't know if I think of that album cover when I think of Sexy Death God, but...
No, the album cover is a different thing. The album cover, I'm not saying the album... That's... Okay. You know, I'll talk about it because it's... that. Okay, the art for these albums started to get a little... questionable in my taste. Like, I think that they started being almost... I wouldn't say... Well, I don't want to say bad, but not... They look almost rushed at times.
Yeah.
To me. And this is a perfect example. It's like a skull and like in the eyes, and I think the mouth is like naked women.
Yep.
And then you open up the cover, like the covers and stuff had like the Christian Death logo, but it's like a naked woman on it. And like there's just all kinds of, I think there's even like just a it's
I mean, I wonder if it's a budgetary issue, like Because I mean, I don't know if you don't have money for a cover. I mean,
back then too, yeah. But I don't know. I feel like, unfortunately for me, it distracts from the music.
Yeah, I would say a little bit. Like, if I saw this record in a record store, like, I'll admit to my own aestheticism. Like, I wouldn't be super keen on picking it up because I'd be like, I don't like the art that much.
Yeah, I hate to say that. I mean, it almost makes us sound like snobs for that or something. I mean, if it does, I mean, people like stuff that looks cool.
Yeah, I think it's a natural human impulse. I mean, of course we should like music for the music, but it's all an experience. There's a reason that you put work into an album cover, into the music videos that go with it.
Yep. Yeah. And this album just for me didn't. Yeah, it starts to be, and we're going to see that with some of the next stuff too. But I don't know what the deal with all that is. I wish I knew. I wish there was an explanation for that. Anyway, at Threshold, again, we have atonal noise.
Yep, ambient intro.
Some really weird, uncomfortable lip smacking and growls and stuff.
Yeah, they start getting into some ASMR-y soundscape stuff.
Yep, it literally is just like it sounds so gross.
Well, they're preparing you for the kingdom of the tainted kiss.
Yep, this is what we're talking about. These insanely over the top. Do you want the most sexual lyrics ever? Like, it's this is where you start to see it, where it's just all about it's all about sexual stuff. It's all about this. It's insane. In fact, I remember we complained about Vision thing, where he says where Andrew Eldritch was like, I got 34 floors or whores or whatever, I need 30 floors more, and that's like way less than this.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. I mean, I hope they were intended to be campy, but I don't know. Maybe he was exploring new ideas with his lyricism, but it just doesn't feel like the strongest lyrical work. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with having like a really sexual song. It's just some of these lyrics are sexual and then seemingly a little vapid, at least.
I don't think it's a coincidence either that you start seeing Nine Inch Nails come out.
Yeah.
And even before, Closer and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That you do see like the more sexual stuff, even with like the Broken EP.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that probably had some sort of influence, or like the industrial scene and stuff, people being more sexual, but like there's something to be said about execution on these things. And I didn't feel like this album had the best execution of it. Like, it's like we're talking about with like the vocals being mixed too high, right?
Yeah.
If it's done in just slightly the wrong way, it sticks out. Yeah. And it doesn't feel like it's a cohesive piece. And that's what I feel like the lyrics on this album for most of the stuff, and the really over the top ones, that's what it's missing. Is there needs to be like some kind of filter or something, or adjustment to it to where it blends with it, or maybe it's the way the vocals are delivered, or the way the band needs to be mixed together, but it doesn't connect, and it's really hard to describe.
Yeah, it just feels like there's like one missing piece to a lot of these things, because if I take the lyrics away from this song, and even just paying attention to the melody and like the track in and of itself, it's kind of an interesting track. Like, it's not just kind of an interesting track. I actually think it's a really solid track, like something that I feel like Christian Death definitely would have released. Like, it makes sense for them. It's got energy. I feel like it's throwing to their punk roots. It's got a heaviness about it, which is kind of cool. Arguably, a lot of their stuff has been heavy before, but not necessarily with the, like, if you take like the early like Roz era stuff, I mean, the heaviest stuff that they did then, while heavy, you always had like really trebly guitars, where I feel like these are much more like bottom heavy guitars. And
yeah, well, it starts to get into more, if you want to still call this music just like death rock, it's definitely the more rock aspect of it, whereas like the earlier stuff had an influence of sort of punk, especially in the way that it's mixed and stuff or recorded. Whereas this just seems more like taking rock and then bringing it to a different place, instead of taking punk and bringing it to a different place.
Yeah. I almost feel like there's some more metal influence in these records.
Oh, I think especially with Prophecies and Pornographic Messiah,
Yep.
I mean, we're going to see a lot more of that. This is definitely, we start to see a lot of that come in, though. But yeah, you're not wrong about a lot of the instrumentation on this is great. You know, not only on Kingdom of the Tainted Kiss, but Heresy Act 2, which is an awesome song.
Oh, yeah.
Now, probably one of my favorites on the entire album. By the way, if you're wondering where the 2 came from, this is Heresy, obviously on Sex, Drugs, and Jesus Christ.
Yep.
That's the original. So, but you have the good, raw, driving bass, which that's a Maytree. Like, when Maytree comes into the band, you start to see a lot more bass-oriented songs coming in.
Well, I really appreciate it because I feel like, I don't know, it's something that I always really appreciate about bands that start in the punk scene or continue in the punk scene. Because I don't know, everybody's got different tastes in like what their tonal sounds are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I always kind of like a fair amount of bottom end in the bass, and I feel like she has a way of playing bass that's really kind of low end heavy and like thumpy, but still aggressive. Like it's not missing attack. It doesn't feel like it's just like flat wounds or something. Like
Yeah, and there's the other thing too about the bass sounds on this album and Prophecies, and maybe it's just my modern sensibility about bass is that I just wish it was like chunkier, you know, like.
Yeah.
But I really believe that that's just like the modern filter in my head trying to be like, oh, it needs to be like more thumping, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to remix it, I would probably want a little more attack out of the bass in and of itself. But for the time, I think that was fairly cutting as far. I mean, outside of like some really low budget albums where they had a lot of high end in the bass because that was what the way they were recording it and the nature of how it turned out. If you were professionally recording something for bass, I think you often ended up with even a lot more low end than they have on the bass.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I think for the time, it's actually a really, really good bass sound.
Like I said, you do have like Heresy Act 2, awesome song. You have some just like, it's like, again, I feel like this starts to be really transitioned. Like the next 3 albums kind of make more sense together. But you have the song Damn You. Again, weird vocals and the arrangements. Like you start to see this thing. I don't understand.
It starts to feel like they're really, really experimenting with the arrangements. Like they'll just jump tempos randomly or like, I mean, it's not to say that you can't do these things. It just sometimes will feel a little misplaced.
Yeah, or going from like a really hard rocking song to just all of a sudden like ambient noise and then back into it. And very interesting. You still see the soundscape stuff with Into Dust.
Yeah.
The choir singing and stuff. But like each song too, like it will have different drum sounds. I feel like that's one of the most varying things in this, like, because Dammy's drums almost sound like, and it's gonna sound weird, it almost sounds like Pink Floyd type drum beats. Like,
oh, that makes sense to me. I could see the through line to that. I do really like the drumming on. This is probably one that has some of the Pink Floyd-y drum sounds, but I really like the drumming on Eternal Dust.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. It's just very kind of like, I guess they're very Tom heavy stuff.
That song too reminds me really a lot of their earlier stuff, like, which is again one of the better things where it just has a cohesive sound to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the bass, like, just good. It's a grimy sounding song. Like, this is the part of the, like, these songs are where the album actually hits it and it works.
Yeah. I agree.
But that's the problem. That's actually one of the things that sucks is the way it opens. Like, it may be a statement about what the album is meant to represent, but you have a lot of these other songs buried in here of a pretty beefy track listing.
Yeah.
That's, really awesome.
Well, it's that thing where, I don't know, similar to the last album where you start adding a lot of ambient, transition songs.
Yes.
While I do like having like transitions between songs and like lead-ins and like thought-provoking sound design, we'll see more of it, I think, particularly in the next 2 albums. It really starts to feel like the good songs are hard to find. Like, if I was an average listener and someone like handed me this record, I feel like I would listen to like 2 songs and be like, oh, I see the direction this is heading. I don't know if I like it. And then you don't realize that it's about to jump into like a banger of a song. And
Absolutely. Yes. And that's a problem with whenever you don't. Yeah. And okay. And it's also the thing, right? Artistic vision, right?
yeah.
It could be the strongest ones to him or to the entire band to be like, what are you talking about? That's the album. But from a general listener perspective, even though me and you are two very different humans, we both see that like, it's like, that song's the strongest. What, are you crazy? Like, no, of course these ones should be better. So that may mean something, or maybe we just have two similar opinions, but
yeah,
I don't believe that's true. I mean,
yeah. People can go back and listen to some prior episodes.
Yeah, I think we disagreed on. I'm pretty sure one of the descriptions of the episodes was like, "Oh wow, an episode where they actually agree on something." Like, but by the way, I gotta mention this. The song "Deeply, Deeply." Okay, one, this is like Disney's Haunted Mansion music is what it sounds like to me.
Okay, well, that's where I start to feel like. I feel like it carries over from the last album where they're starting to embrace some of the campiness. Like it feels, I don't know, like a cabaret song almost. Like,
yeah, but the lyrics.
Oh yeah, okay. That's what makes it.
The lyrics are literally, I stick it deeply, deeply.
Yep.
I stick it deep. What?
Well, yeah, so this is to me where the lyrics are a hindrance to some of these songs, and very particularly to this song. So, I don't know. There's plenty of great songs that have been about sex. I mean, even taking like, I don't know, things that might have been external influences, like 9 Inch Nails. Like a lot of those songs are sexual. Great lyrics, though.
Yeah. Typo Negative.
Yeah, Typo Negative. Great example. Very sexual lyrics, but they're well written. They feel thought out. They feel like they're adding to the story of the song. This one just feels, I don't know, like if a porno made a song.
I did not expect you to say that. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I did not expect that at all. But I agree with you. Like, but you know what's funny? I actually think a different album is Porno the song.
No, I will agree. I think we're going to have a similar opinion on that. I feel like this song in particular is like Porno made a song.
Yeah, I feel it. And that's really the problem, is that you like with songs like Kingdom of the Tainted Kiss, Deeply, Deeply, and then just some of the weird soundscapes sort of stuff like Invitation on Suicide, Drilling the Hole, but not Drilling the Hole necessarily, but that is a very repetitive song to me. Into Dust, like you just have so much of this padded with soundscape stuff and
some ASMR.
Yes, right. But I feel like if you cut out like 6 of these tracks, like you would have like a super strong album.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think that this doesn't need to be a 14-track album. I think this would do pretty well as like an 8-10 track album. Like, you know.
I totally agree. The over the top stuff. Also, I got to mention Temples of Desire. But like that, again, just listen for yourself. But just kind of pick out the really good tracks and hear for yourself. It just, yeah, that's my, I don't really have much else to say about it, but yeah, that cover also ain't helping the cause. Ain't helping the cause here.
It's not. I would say overall, I think the songs themselves, at least outside of the atmospheric ones for me, feel really strong, like instrumentally. Lyrics, I feel like are not really delivering for me, or in some way are hindering the song.
Yeah.
And then I just feel like there's a little too much of the ambient tracks. Like, cool idea. I would like to see like a revised version of this album, ideally, that like where they scaled some of that back a little bit, or at the threshold, I don't think needs to be 2 minutes and 25 seconds. Like we could cut that down to like 45 seconds.
We're 2 albums in, right? So although we've already talked about the other Valor Kand era stuff, I do feel like it's funny because we're already coming to a consensus that's different than the internet, as we already have before, that it's not just all total garbage. So
no, it's not all total garbage. I actually think it's, for the most part, I would say, I think that the actual band performances themselves actually even get better from the last album onto this one. For me, the most distracting thing is just really the lyrics.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Absolutely. Also the soundscape stuff, but
well, yeah.
Don't need to be hearing that. Don't need to be hearing that. So, yeah, that is a Sexy Death God. That's it, Robert. I've had it. I feel like I'm having visions of a new album. I feel like somebody told me about it a long time ago. This album. I can't see. It was in a statement. What would you call it, Robert? What would you call that message that was given to me about something?
It's got to be something prophetic.
Prophetic? Wait. Prophecy.
Prophecies.
That's what I'm going with. Christian Death Prophecies.
All right.
1996. All right. But yeah, this is the next album we're talking about. It's different. This is a concept album, I believe. I mean, like I said, there's not as much information about these albums as later albums. And, it's interesting. I mean, this is essentially Nostradamus predictions the album.
Yeah.
And we do have, again, some differences in the lineup. And we're going to have this for this album and then for the next album, I believe. It's hard to tell on the drums, but we have Stephen Wright on drums, Flick, and then his last name is the F word, so Flick, and Fuck on second guitar. And then we have Maytree again on bass and vocals, and Valor, of course. But yeah, Nostradamus, the album. And even though there's less songs, it almost feels longer for some reason, at least to me.
Yeah.
Very different album.
Well, I would say, I think part of the reason that they feel longer, at least in part to me, is just because when they do stack ambient stuff on this album, they'll stack like a few together before they go into like a full track or a regular track, I suppose.
Yeah, well, this album, I noticed that they seem to do a lot more of the rock song than ambient middle part, and then rock song again, and then another ambient part.
It feels more. It feels like they're starting to figure out like a sort of formula. Like they're doing like, let's say, 2 ambient tracks, and then they go into a full rock song, and then they pull away and maybe do something different instead of kind of like cutting around within the songs themselves. And
yeah, well, just the intro again, 2-minute keyboard intro for without, and then the vocals. By the way, I think the vocals are a lot better mixed on this album. They're a lot lower.
The mixing in general on this album actually gets a lot better.
Yes, absolutely.
Like this actually kind of, we'll see. This might be my favorite of the 3 of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I did not expect that. Wow, okay.
Purely from like an audio, well, maybe not purely, but definitely from an audio standpoint. Like
it's definitely helping you.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I didn't expect that one to be the one that you pick.
I didn't expect it either, but I kind of dug the rock track. I mean, lyrics are again still a little bit of a hindrance at times, but
yeah,
when they're rocking on some of these songs, like I don't know, I feel like they do it well. Like they feel cohesive as a band. Like Alone to me, I don't know exactly what they're doing with it. It sounds like they're ducking the guitar on like the kick drum or something.
Oh yeah, Alone almost sounds like reverse sounds.
Yeah, or they might have sampled the guitar or something, which is why I think maybe an influence from industrial at this point. But I still feel like it works, and like the guitar parts are heavy and cool, and the drums are grooving, and the bass is working together. So for me, like the performance on Alone is really good, and then like the vocal I feel sits well within the song.
Yeah, well, I definitely am starting to hear the industrial stuff with this, not only on Alone, but the album is really riff intensive.
Oh yeah,
and much more so than like
a lot of
talked
tracks.
about
like even just going into the next track, like the Great Swarm of Bees is like super riff heavy again, and you start seeing it like a lot on this album. I would say that like Into the Shit World is a little less riff oriented, but it feels like there's a cohesive band sound on this album much more to me than on the prior two.
I agree with that, where it feels more like a band, and part of that could be the mixing and everything, but the songs just feel like more cohesive, and with it being, I'm assuming, somewhat of a concept album, it feels like the ideas are more explored here. With like Black Empire, you have and Alone, and a lot of the other stuff, just like a very industrial sort of sound, especially on the guitars, and even doing the dual vocals more. That's like the Great Swarm of Bees, and just a lot of that, like the Half Pig Man, again, super aggressive, very riffy, very deep, distorted vocals.
Yeah, they're kind of getting into like industrial metal territory on a lot of these tracks.
Yeah, and I mean, that's cool. The fact that they actually have some sort of concept or some sound that they're going for, and that's not too far off of a guess to think that they were actually influenced by it, because I was listening to interviews with Valor, and he is talking about industrial bands and how people are very interested in that sort of sound at the time. And so I don't think it's too far for us to take that guess that they were like, oh, hey.
Yeah, I don't think it's too far a guess. And even if they weren't necessarily influenced by industrial bands, I'm sure that they were influenced by metal bands because Christian Death originally grew out of, the hardcore scene being a, death rock band. And those bands were very equally influenced by punk and metal.
Yeah, absolutely. And industrial just kind of, people really, it's so hard to describe to people, like the influence of industrial music on, especially like goth music and just that kind of electronic stuff, and like Front 242 and all that, let alone the actual like super, super mainstream stuff. So, a lot of bands started to incorporate that. I mean, but it's, I think it's done better here than some other bands I've heard, where they just all of a sudden, like, is it when we did Rosetta Stone and like that sort of stuff, like at least initially, like I don't know about Misery Lab stuff, but initially it was like, okay, I think you guys need to go back to some more guitar rock stuff, in our opinion. But yeah, I mean, you still have some others. Like, you have less soundscapey stuff, which I'm happy for. My favorite song on the album is actually Thunderstorm.
Thunderstorm's a good one.
Yeah, slower. It's more melodic, acoustic guitar. I just liked it a lot. Like, I didn't expect that.
It definitely throws you for a loop when you have like 3 tracks like prior that are more riff centered. I suppose the Pig Half Man is, you've got a fair amount of tracks. Like from Alone up until this point, I feel like you've got some heavy stuff going on, guitar, drums, and bass wise. And then you have this track that is kind of like a breather. And it's at a good place in the album. I mean, track 7 out of 10, I think, is a good place to put a slower number in. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. I do kind of, that's the thing that actually kind of is a bummer to me too, is also there's less soundscape tracks, but there's less tracks. So if you have 3 soundscape tracks essentially on this record, the ending song, the beginning song to some extent, and the black ones, but so you have 3, like 30% of your album be like heavily soundscape based. And I get if it's a concept, like, because the 1999 is a really long like track, but it's just ambient.
It's a very, very long track.
Yes. So
it's the free bird of ambient music. It shouldn't be as long as it is, but 1999 I think actually works well as like an ambient outro track. Like the kind of stuff that they're doing doesn't feel too campy to me, like on the last album where you've got like lip smacking and sex sounds.
Yes. Well, if the concept of the world ending in 1999, if that's a Nostradamus thing, then I thought the same thing, because it's kind of when it's sort of like, you're like, okay, I get it, whereas more so the other stuff was like okay, it's sexual.
Yeah.
Like, like cool. But this was much more about like just a deeper kind of topic. So I was very happy that that it just was better. I understand.
Yeah.
The art for this, what do you think of the art?
I actually really like it. It's not like super intricate or anything, but I think that it works with the concept I think that they're going with. I don't think it's distracting from the music in and of itself, or that it takes away. I feel like it's kind of a throwback in some ways to some of the earlier designs with having the Christian Death logo on top.
Atrocities. Yeah, well, I was trying to figure out what the heck this picture was.
Yeah.
And I believe it's a crematorium.
Yeah.
Because I actually was able to pull up the full image of, what the cropped image was.
Yeah.
And it was mostly like, I think it was like Russian sites that had it or something. So I don't know if it was like some kind of Russian crematorium photo.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's much more subdued than the other releases are.
I think it's much more palatable than Sexy Death God.
I think you're right. And say what you will about that, but it's sometimes the more subtle thing is the thing that's more impactful.
Yeah.
And this is a case to me where I'm like, yep, that makes more sense to me. Yeah. Whereas like, less naked photos of the band and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just thought the package overall worked a lot better. And yeah, I don't think it's as definitive of an album as like Scriptures for me, whereas it had a lot of albums or Atrocities. I don't think it stacks up to those albums in my mind.
No.
But if say you had Atrocities, Scriptures, this, and then Sex, Drugs, and Jesus Christ, like I think that would probably, I'd be like, oh yeah, like that's a way better kind of album. But
I would tend to agree. Yeah.
But as far as being like a technically by this point later in the career album, pretty cool, kind of album. They came out of the ballpark in 1996. I mean, think of what other music was come out in 1996.
Yeah.
It's pretty out there, even though it is influenced by a lot of stuff from that time. But honestly, like, I mean, I recommend it to some extent. I would, not all of it, again.
There's some problems, but I think overall, overall my inclination is I recommend.
If you've heard the other stuff a lot, and you want to hear some more of the stronger material from this band, then yeah, I recommend it. So there you go. That's Prophecies.
Woo!
That's it, Robert. I've had it. I don't want any more scripture. Multiple scriptures. I don't want this album. What am I saying? Okay, this is Pornographic Messiah by Christian Death.
It's going to be like, do you want some porno scriptures?
No, it's God. Okay. So we just got done complimenting how subtlety and like a little bit of that goes a long way with this band after Sexy Death God. And so in light of that,
they decided to go the opposite direction.
Yes. This album, it's literally called Pornographic Messiah, 1998. And it is,
17 songs of sex and God.
And let me just tell you flat out, I'm not a big fan of this album. Just right out the bat. Not even just because of that, but just it's very heavily influenced by industrial and almost like nu metal kind of riffs to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all over it's there's some good stuff here, but like it's also very hard to tune out the cover because even on pretty much everything like Spotify, YouTube Music, pretty much everything.
Well, mind you, Spotify is usually not too bad about this. Like, I don't know, I've seen album covers with nudity on them before. Yeah. But, censored album cover on Spotify.
Yeah, that's the first time this is the first time I've ever seen that. It's literally a black box over the album cover. And the album I'm gonna leave the people to look the album cover up for themselves. You can probably imagine what the contents of it are with a name like that. But even when it was released in the US on CD, it did have an edited cover, which is also looks terrible. I'm just gonna be honest. I'm playing Art Critic right now.
Yeah, that one's not great either, but I will admit, if I had to choose, if I was in the band's position, I would have chosen that one.
Yes. And then also, I think the CD tray for some versions is like the covers, the edited cover, and then the CD tray like insert is like the original cover. So yeah, it's something. We basically have the same lineup from this previous album, but apparently on Steve. So for Prophecies, we have Stephen Wright on drums, and then for this one, I believe it's credited as Steve/Stefani on drums. So I don't know what the deal with that is, but this definitely seems to be a concept album. It has several acts to the songs.
Yep.
And just we're going back to the very sexual things for this. It's just right from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, literally the first like 3 seconds.
I would say this sort of feels like Sexy Death God Part Doof for me.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think that's probably the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have some... God, I don't even know where to begin with this. It's like, it's very aggressive. And not just... I mean, it's also aggressive in the playing.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's definitely some industrial, and to me, it really sounds like nu metal influenced kind of music. And by the way, nu metal stuff, I know nowadays it's just laughed at, like, like nu metal and stuff. But you got to remember back then, there was really nothing like that back then with the detuned guitars and the kind of groove rhythms and
well, and I would say that it did have a lasting impact on the metal scene. Like, I don't think that like the whole hardcore like chug like thing would have really taken off without nu metal.
Yes,
and like a lot of the groove metal stuff that exists now, like that still takes influence from nu metal while not being necessarily as on the money or on the ball with that stuff. Is they're
trying to align themselves more with metal than they are metal rap or whatever that was. But now that I've kind of tried to decompress from the absurdity of this album, let me talk about actually some of the good stuff about it. You do have some songs like I said, industrial kind of songs, largely on this album, but you do have some pretty awesome stuff that reminds me of other bands or is just pretty cool. One of the ones that reminds me a lot of Typo Negative actually is the Millennium Unwinds, which the guitars really, really remind me of Typo Negative. I mean...
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, you've got that very... I mean, I guess Typo Negative isn't the only band to have done it, but, that super flangery, chorusy, guitar lead.
Exactly. But you do have some of the repetition. And by the way, that's like a thing that I think is probably the album's biggest detriment is like some of the repetition and stuff.
Yeah.
But I will say that a lot of the songs, I don't know, it's hard to say. There's multi-part songs, and some of them still have the standard clocking in at like 3.5 minutes, which is like usually standard length of a regular tempo song. Honestly, the songs that hit, like they have parts that are really good. The lyrics, questionable to me. Even the dissension of faith. Sorry about that. It's like, as I walk through the valley of this, in the shadow of death, but it says in the shadow of Christian death. I was like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing?
It's a little too on the nose for me.
Yes. And the origin of man almost reminds me of like a Nine Inch Nails or Marilyn Manson of the time song.
I could see that. I mean, particularly talking about like industrial influences, I would say like the vocals on Millennium Unwinds and even on Dissension of Faith, they kind of remind me of KMF DMM kind of vocals.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I could totally hear that. And also like it seems to me also like some Ministry stuff on this record.
Yeah, I could see that too.
I hate reviewing things where I feel like I'm just comparing it to other stuff. But if Prophecies has influence from other like industrial music, this almost feels like you could hear a playlist of what they were listening to and then putting it into it.
Yeah, the origin of man just feels like it kind of feels like a ripoff of like a Marilyn Manson song, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the Lie Behind the Truth, like similar kind of stuff going on there.
And I don't like saying that about bands. Like I feel like we've been pretty fair. Like I really liked the last album, and I just feel like this doesn't feel inspired in the same way to me. Like
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I don't know what it was as far as the band, because the band is largely the same.
Yeah.
Something like just doesn't click with me with this album. There's also a lot of songs, a lot of material on this album.
Yeah.
Again, like the last one, I just felt like it didn't need to be that long.
Yeah, it's an hour and 13 minutes, 17 songs.
That's a lot of music and it's for a lot of music for that sounds like other music.
Yeah.
And so
like that's usually a double album situation, like back in the day if you were doing LP or something.
Yes.
And if you were doing a double album back then, I mean, you were going to make sure you had a damn good record if you were going to be brave enough to release a double LP.
I know, you did that much studio time and stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, it's frustrating to me because Prophecies I felt like had its own identity.
Yeah.
And even Sexy Death God.
Even Sexy Death God, well, I don't like it necessarily that much. Like it being of the same sort of like, I don't know, pornographic for no other reason than to be pornographic thing.
Yes.
To me. That still feels like it has more of its own identity than this does.
Well, even like Weave My Spell, where you get into like seriously like techno beats and distorted vocals, and you know what that sounds like? It sounds like a Rammstein song. So
it does. I mean, and that's not to say that Weave My Spell doesn't, like, it's to me kind of a catchy song.
Absolutely, yes.
I would just rather listen to Rammstein at that point. Like,
yeah, that's really my biggest frustration with this album is that, like I said, like I just said with Prophecies, I felt like it could have fit in with more so than the other albums we listened to with some of the 80s stuff.
Yeah.
Or like, you could trace the idea like, okay, here, but Pornographic Messiah, I'm sure it made sense to the band, but to me, it doesn't make sense. Even when you have a song like The Corruption of Innocence, which has like a really cool chugging kind of quality to it, and it's really aggressive.
Yeah.
Then like the lyrics, you're just like, you either are like really on board with the absurdity of, or the aggressiveness of the lyrics.
Yeah.
Or you could be halfway with it, but I feel like either people are going to be on board with that or they're not. And I just am like, you could have done something else with it. I don't know. You also have some songs like Does It Hurt, just kind of repetitive with some strange audio intros. And
Sex Dwarf has a cool intro, but
yes,
I feel like then it becomes, I mean, I like where it drops in, but I feel like it just becomes repetitive from that point. Like, it brings me into something cool, and then I feel like the song doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, also just that song, being cover of Soft Cell's Nonstop it's a cover of Sex Dwarf by Soft Cell from the amazing album Nonstop Erotic Cabaret.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you got something to live up to there already.
Yeah, and it's weird because Maitri actually sings the woo woo woo, which is normally the keyboard part. And of course, there's always been a thing with bands, like especially at that time, like heavier or goth bands covering the stuff, or like Orgy covering Blue Monday and stuff. I'm trying to take it from the 90s, not the 80s.
Yeah,
but, I didn't. It's okay. I mean, it's okay. I mean, but does it hold up to a lot of the other really good songs from the other albums? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Also, I really did want to mention this. Out of Control. What is up with the screams? Okay, there's one thing to having screams on a song. It's like, that would be uncomfortable to listen to. Like, if you're in your car and you're bumping Out of Control, it literally sounds like it's being murdered. Not in like a cool way. It's just like, you're just like, oh man.
Well, it doesn't even feel like they're super well played, because people will sample screams and throw them into songs, and they'll hit like on every 8th or 16th bar or on offbeats or something like that, but they just kind of feel a little random to me. And I mean, I guess they're going for something because they've got like the police sirens and the
the
radio And yeah, it's a little heavy-handed. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, well, this album is very heavy-handed in every aspect.
Yep.
I don't know what it was. It's even with Sexy Death God, I was like, okay, I kind of get it. But something about this one, I just had so much trouble connecting with it. Maybe it's the whole package. I don't know if it's the cover or maybe if it was like a piece of cheese or something, I would be more okay with it, or just it would be like, oh, okay, now it clicks. But I really can say I just didn't like this album that much.
Even given my penchant for wanting to applaud bands for good like recording quality, because I do feel like there's actually decent recording quality on this album.
This was probably the best recorded album of the ones we listened to.
Yeah, actually really solid mixing and production value. But that just goes to show that even if you've got really good mixing, if your songs aren't that great, I don't feel like it holds up. And even the other stuff that we've reviewed today, like being more raw and less polished, I'd recommend any of those 3 albums over this one.
Absolutely. Well, actually, the two of the ones that we listened to today. Oh, by the way, just on the final thing for that, I don't recommend this album.
Yeah. If it's not clear, but yeah.
Yeah, the 2 I would actually recommend is Insanus, the first one.
Yeah.
Whatever. Insanus, Ultio, yeah.
Yep.
And Prophecies.
Same. I think your favorite is Insanus. Mine's Prophecies, but same recommendation at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think Sexy Death God is, I just recommend the songs that we recommend off that album.
Yeah.
Which I guess it kind of goes for Prophecies as well, but I think more so that album's just, in terms of a mixing quality, it's going to be a lot harder of a sell for most people.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think like most people, because I wasn't as familiar with these albums, you hear so much bad stuff about these albums, right? You just hear so much bad stuff. And honestly, like, as we've discovered doing these episodes before and now, there's actually some good stuff in there. Like, it's not just total garbage. Like, everyone would just have you believe it's just everything after it's just terrible. Everything after the Holy Theater Paint or Ashes is just horrible. There's actually some pretty decently good songs. I think you could probably compile all of these songs into one collection.
Yeah.
It would probably work better that way.
I would agree.
But
certainly, I think you could take like Insanus and Prophecies and maybe compile those 2 together, and then maybe Sexy Death God and Pornographic Messiah. I think like combining those 2 albums into
to the best songs. Yeah. That's pretty much all I have to say on these albums. But again, I do not recommend Pornographic Messiah. Okay, maybe you'll find something. Maybe somebody.
I'm sure someone will. Yeah, everyone's got a different opinion. I would say if you're a big fan of the Valor Kand era, check it out anyways, because I don't know, maybe there's something that we're missing that someone else will find in this, that's of value to them, that they connect with. But just for me, it doesn't really hit home.
Yeah, some of the band stuff's okay on that one, but I don't know. It's just as better on the other ones. That's the thing that we can come back to, is the other 3 that we talked about today, I thought were just overall, even with their issues, are better albums. Yeah. So, anyway, you know what that means.
What does that mean, Donnie?
This has been GothCast with Dr. Sanders and Robbie Gore. Reunion. And so, of course, you can leave reviews on iTunes. You probably are listening to this on Spotify. I'm just taking a guess based on numbers.
Also, app suggestion. Check out Overcast for podcasts if you guys like podcasts.
Overcast, yes, you can be on there. Castbox, the app too, as well. I've heard of that one, but it's lots of places. Yeah, but
you can find it anywhere.
You can leave iTunes reviews. Of course, if you want to hear my latest album, Patch Overlap. Oh, it's so good. Oh yeah, it is. Thanks, Robert. You could get that on cassette at drsanders.bandcamp.com, or just look up Dr. Sanders on Bandcamp. And
side fact, who is the bass player on that record?
Wait a second. It's you.
Oh, shit.
Yes, that is correct. The bass player on that album for quite a number of the songs is Robbie Gore, because we recorded a lot of those bed tracks when we were still in each other's lives for a majority of the time.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's awesome. It's really cool it's funny. I think I just need to have Chase on this podcast to have everybody.
Yeah.
Because, or I guess Jacob too, because I was trying to think of all the band members of the time. But yeah, you can check out that album. Be like, ooh, that bass playing is so good. And who you'd be like, oh Oh, it's Robert. Anyway, this has been GothCast. And of course, make sure to... Make sure to... why don't you say it this time, since it's been so long? Did you ever say it at the end?
Make sure to stay spooky.
Whoa, okay, there it happened.